On average, 123 people commit suicide every day. For each one of them, there are 25 attempts. This number reported by the CDC. Today, we have experts on the topic to tell us a little bit more about it. But also joining us on the phone is State Senator Luis Sepulveda, who joins us now, and he shares a little bit with us about the issue of suicide. And Senator Sepulveda, good to have you.
Thank you, as always, to be on your show, Daren. I hope you're doing well.
Oh, doing well, doing well. Listen, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about this here because, first of all, it's a matter that deals close to home for you, particularly with your mother. Share with us a little bit about it.
Well, yeah, I mean, when I was about 10 and a half years old, my mother suffered from depression, committed suicide when I was about 10, and really didn't deal with it much until I was much older in life and, upfront witnessed the collateral damage that happens to families that lose family members to suicide. It's a tragedy. It's long-lasting, especially when you have young children. Fortunately, I was able to overcome it, but there are many people many families who still deal with that years later.
Yeah, and our condolences to you. Give me a little bit about, you talk about collateral damage, and obviously when we hear about the death of like Kate Spade, we hear the death of Anthony Bourdain, people that, on one side look like they have it going on, but then all of a sudden we find out there's a problem.
Well, yeah, I mean, the issue of suicide impacts every particular strata in life, every particular wealth class, every particular educational field, it's really an issue of mental illness. People are suffering from mental illness, and unfortunately, they don't get diagnosed. They still have the issue with stigma. Generally speaking, children start to manifest issues of mental illness about 8, but don't get treatment for about 10 years. So for a long period of time, things that can help us overcome and lead to things like suicide aren't treated till very later on. But it's a very serious issue. If you look in communities of color, for example, of young Latinas ages 11 to 19, suicide is the second biggest cause of death. You have high numbers of young African-American boys, who are also, the numbers are creeping in a way that I consider an epidemic. Now, we don't treat it. Essentially, the issue hasn't come to the forefront as much as till recently when you have these high-profile celebrities and individuals who commit suicide. But certainly, we've been trying to tackle this now, at least since I got elected in the Assembly, and there's some good groups that have been working on it. But it's a real serious issue.
Yeah, can you talk to us a little bit about what New York is doing? Because I know the governor has recently come out saying that he wants to go front and center with this, dealing with the issue of suicide and creating some committees and putting some things forward so that way New York State can kind of deal with this issue.
Well, I mean, it's one thing is a budgetary issue. When you talk about mental illness itself, how much funds are allocated statewide for this issue, for treatment. And, I had a meeting with the governor a couple of months ago where I told him that I thought it was woefully inadequate, the amount of money to tackle the issue of mental illness. And, he took note, myself and other colleagues that are working through legislation and budgets to increase the funding. There's some good people that have been working. There's a woman by the name of Dr. Rosa Gill, who has a program called Life is Precious. And the mayor helped us allocate some money for that. And the Assembly Speaker, Colonel Hashley, helped us allocate about $500,000 for this program. And it basically deals with teen suicide. So we have the mayor, the governor, individual not-for-profit organizations that have taken this head on and are dealing with it. But it all ends and begins, at least a success, with the amount of funding that we get.
I want to ask you, as we wrap up, as now a state senator and you're a person that's actually risen the ranks professionally, how do you still cope and deal with this issue? Because obviously it has to come back and it plays out every time you hear about someone else who commits suicide.
I was, it's a difficult topic even now that I'm 54 years old. And unfortunately, I didn't get any therapy. I didn't go to a doctor. I didn't go to a therapist or psychiatrist or otherwise. I just dealt with it myself. And as I got older, I educated myself. But it's certainly very difficult. Every time you hear the word, it brings back memories. When you hear about young people, or even people like Anthony Bourdain, I mean, you think about that. The pain always surfaces, but after years of dealing with it, you learn to deal with it and control it.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, State Senator Luis Sepulveda, joining us here on the set talking about suicide. And, of course, we're going to continue this conversation. Thanks so much, Senator Sepulveda.
Thank you so much.
All
Great
right.
program. Always good to speak to you.
Hey, thanks. Glad to have you. And listen, now joining us right here in studio is therapist Luis Lopez, who deals and talks about that issue of suicide. Thank you so much, Dr. Lopez, for being with us.
Thank you for having me, Daren. It's a pleasure.
Listen, when we talked with the state senator, he says that it was kind of ironic. He said when it comes to the issue of suicide himself, his mother committed suicide. He himself, to this day, never has actually sought counseling himself to actually deal with it. And you think about that, and you think about, wow, something so tragic, and yet and still there are a lot of people who walk around as part of what we say the collateral damage and really don't do anything to help themselves.
Unfortunately, that does happen a lot. I'm sure there's a lot of reasons why individuals choose not to go to counseling. Me, on the other hand, I strongly believe that in the counseling profession, I think that's a very good tool to help individuals process certain traumas and things that happen in their lives. And I hope that anyone who goes through something that tragic can actually reach out to someone for help.
Yeah, well, let's talk a little bit about this, because we were taking it back last week when first was Kate Spade and then Anthony Bourdain. A short time ago, two major celebrities, the world definitely looks at them through a certain lens, and for many people, never seeing it coming. And that happens to be the case a lot of times with people who commit suicide. What are the warning signs that maybe we're missing here?
That's a good question. There's usually a behavior that changes in a person that lets you know that something's happening. Someone who's actively engaged in certain activities and all of a sudden now they're isolating, they're withdrawing, they're doing certain things. It's typically an indicator that something is wrong and that person may be in need of help.
I want to take a look at some statistics that are going to be coming to the screen right now that gives you an understanding about suicide and how the numbers continue to rise. And we're going to throw that up so that way you get an opportunity to see it. And then we're going to ask Dr. Lopez to share a little bit with us here about it. But there you see the numbers that are actually rising. And suicides in America, 45,000 since 2016. Died without no mental condition. If you see the numbers now in dark blue, they reflect people who died with no without a no medical condition, and that number continues to increase by 38 to 58%. And so when we look here, and we're seeing some of the states, and actually they're actually up getting close towards the Midwest and moving towards the West. What can we make of this? It's
alarming. These numbers, these statistics are alarming. And according to the same study, it says that more than half of the people who have committed suicide do not have a mental health condition, as you just indicated. It's typically related to life stressors like loss of job, issues with renting, issues with money, other problems that the person or individual is not able to cope with. And possibly because they may have a fear to seek help, they don't know how to deal with this and figure that maybe ending their life or being hopeless is the way that they can deal with a situation, which is absolutely tragic. I think there's a lot of help for individuals out there. It's just a question of reaching out and getting in contact with somebody.
Well, we talk about in communities of color, there's always this stigma about therapy. And unfortunately, a lot of people will not come across your doors because it feels like there's, a stigma that's associated. Talk to people out there who may be watching and saying, listen, you need to talk to somebody. I just had a conversation with a group of people yesterday, and I said to them, I said, talking is good.
Absolutely, I agree. Talking is absolutely good. Unfortunately, there is a stigma. I don't know why individuals feel that if you speak to a professional is an indication of who you are or an indication that you're weak. I think on the contrary, I think that the saying two heads are better than one. I think this principle would apply when it comes to therapy. An individual may come to a session to speak to a professional with a particular problem and may not understand how to deal with it, but then the professional who actually trained for this can have a suggestion that can help the person deal with whatever stressor they're dealing with. So I personally believe that seeking therapy or seeking a professional or counseling for any particular life stressor is definitely a positive, it's definitely a plus, it's something that should be taken advantage of.
Well, people who are my generation, a little bit older, we grew up in that household that said, listen, what goes on in the house stays in the house, right? And so you keep it to yourself. And unfortunately, we find that a lot of people walk around and carry this stuff with them until they reach a breaking point. But talk to us about what are some of the things that can be done that could possibly prevent things such as this happen. I mean, when you look at these two people who are high profile, the question rings out, what could have been done to prevent this? What?
Absolutely, absolutely. Some of the things that individuals can do if you feel that you are struggling with certain stressor, there are hotlines that you can call, the National Suicide Hotline. There's some websites you can visit. I believe the CDC has launched a website called BeTheFirst2.com, where it shows you and talks about certain techniques and certain ways that you can help individuals. And if you're a student, you can speak to your guidance counselor. If you're an adult, I'm sure there's several behavior clinics around your neighborhood that you can stop by, or even speak, if you're a religious individual, maybe speak to your pastor or your religious leader for support. So there's plenty of things that can be done. You can even call 311 and they can guide you to different venues that can give you support for whatever stress or situation you're dealing with.
All right, well, Dr. Luis Lopez, thank you for giving us a little more clarity in it. Hopefully people will take advantage, as you said, and thank you for sharing with us. I want to tell you also, for our viewers who are watching, we encourage you, go to the CDC website. There's also a suicide prevention number that you can also call anytime that you suspect someone that could possibly be wanting to hurt themselves, or if you're a family member that's connected to somebody, you need some much needed information, go to that suicide hotline, reach out, make the call, and you never know, you might just be able to save a life. Thank you, Dr. Lopez, for joining us.
Thank you.
Of course, we're going to have more shows. Stay with us. We're coming right back right after this.